thank you all for joining us on this episode of the Crexi Podcast, an insider's look at all things commercial real estate. In this show, we cover a broad range of topics that cater both to CRE newcomers and industry leaders alike. I'm your host, Taylor Curtis, Senior Account Executive here at Crexi, and today we are thrilled to sit down with Fernando Angelucci of Self-Storage Syndicated Equities. Before we dive in, a little bit about our guest. Fernando is the co-founder and president of Self-Storage Syndicated Equities. As president, Fernando is involved with all aspects of the business, including overall investment strategy, investor relations, asset management, and asset analysis. Fernando is a thought leader in the self-storage industry, regularly featured at industry conferences, and has interviewed over hundreds of podcasts. Fernando earned a Bachelor of Science in Technical Systems Management from University of Illinois. Fernando, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Taylor.
Of course. So I know we just covered a little bit about your background, but I would love to learn a bit more about your career path and the lessons that you learned along the way. So kind of kicking it off, how did you first get your start in commercial real estate?
Yeah, it's kind of a long story. So it actually started when I was 16 years old. I read a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which I'm sure many of your listeners are aware of. And that's when I really realized that there's a different way to operate and to make money. You know, I'm the son of two immigrants from Brazil, and the message ever since I was growing up was you go to school, you get good grades, and then you go to college, you get good grades, and then you go work at a Fortune 50 company for 40, 45 years and retire with a pension. And unfortunately, that is not the easiest thing to do nowadays. So when I read that book, I realized, hey, I want to be a business owner, and specifically, I want to be a real estate business owner. Flash forward to college, I got my TSM degree, which is an offshoot of agro sciences and ag bioengineering. Went and worked for a Fortune 50 company. I had a pension, but very quickly I realized that it wasn't right for me. So jumped immediately into real estate investing. Started with smaller things that I could afford. Single family homes, small multifamilies. And actually the way that I financed that venture was by applying to 63 or 64 credit cards in one night and getting approved for 10 or 12 of them. And then as soon as they arrived to my house, I cash advanced $97,000 off those credit cards to start my real estate investing career. So
It's innovative.
Jumped in with both feet, right? Very quickly started making money, not only on the contract assignment side, but then also fixing and flipping single families, and then buying and holding larger multifamily properties. And I did that for a couple of years until I started to get kind of frustrated with the status quo, especially in some of the larger cities that I was investing in, when it comes to tenants' rights versus owners' rights, specifically when the tenants were not doing what they're supposed to do, right? You know, not paying rent for 6, 7, 8, 9 months, getting away with it, using regular stall tactics. So one day we had a tenant that we had to accept when we bought a 6-unit facility, and it took us eight months to get her out. During that time, she racked up about $25,000 in repairs on the unit that she was in. So I said, you know what, I'm done with this. This is roughly around 2016. And we decided to completely sunset our residential or habitation-based portfolio. During that time, we had a couple of businesses running concurrently. So, you know, single family fix and flip, multifamily fix and flip, buy and hold strategy. We ran an Airbnb company. We ran a hard money lending company that we'd lend capital to other fix and flippers, short-term, higher rates, higher leverage. But then we decided to shut all those down once we found self-storage. And I like self-storage for many reasons, which I'm sure we can go over in this podcast here. But the first one that drew me to it was the difference between eviction law, or tenant landlord law, and property law or lien law. So as soon as I realized that this new industry, self-storage, within 30 days to 45 days of someone not paying their unit and us reaching out and then, you know, ignoring our calls, we had the right to auction off their possessions, recoup all those losses, from that missed month or two of payments, and then have a new paying tenant in there within 45 to 60 days of the first missed payment. And that's how I ended up getting into what I consider commercial real estate. I know a lot of people will consider large multifamily commercial, but you're still dealing with residential tenants. And that's why I don't consider it a commercial asset.
Very interesting. What a story too. I'm sorry you had to go through that. I can only imagine the stress at the time, especially if you had all of that debt from the credit cards too.
Well,
I can imagine.
I was an
Go
engineer
ahead.
by training, so I had it pretty well handled. I broke down my annual, monthly, weekly, and daily credit card interest from taking all those out. So I knew every day how much I was spending if I didn't, get the business rolling and start to pay back those credit cards. So luckily I did pretty well. I was able to pay off those cards pretty quickly. And then from there, grew the business.
I love that. And I can imagine too, like in the moment, that was probably a very tough experience to go through, having someone racking out, $20,000, $30,000 on your tab and not being able to get them out. But it sounds like it was a pivotal moment in helping you transition over to self-storage.
Exactly.
And it sounds like it's night and day too, versus them racking up a tab. Now you're able to auction off their stuff and also have a new tenant in there right away. Yeah. Well, as far as like your journey throughout real estate, who are some of your mentors? I know you mentioned like that book was very influential in getting you into the industry, but yeah, any mentors that come to mind, and how did they shape your path?
Absolutely. I'm a avid reader now. When I was younger, I wasn't a big fan just because I was more math science oriented. But now, I'm usually going through 2 to 3 books a week. Audible is my best friend, really. And the nice thing about books is that you can basically have a mentor for $16 to $18, especially some mentors that are worth billions and billions of dollars. So, I always look back. Robert Kiyosaki was fantastic. The books, he has 2 lines of books. His lower level, which allows you to kind of get a high overview of what the industry is like. And then he also has his advisor series, which instead of having the purple covers or the white covers, where you go really in depth on how to create entities, how to manage those entities, property management, acquisitions, marketing, what have you. From there, started looking at people that I wanted to emulate, specifically in the commercial real estate space. So Sam Zell, he has fantastic content out there. Ray Dalio, another one. Steve Schwarzman, fantastic people. In my personal life, I've had, a ton of mentors, both from, business perspective, real estate and general business, but then also, life as well. Because too many times I come across CEOs and founders that they may have a successful business, but their life is in shambles. They work 90 hours a week. No one in their family wants to talk to them. They're usually pretty bitter people. So the whole point of running a business is, at least from my perspective, is to create the lifestyle that I want. Right before we started recording, I was talking about how I spent 10 months last year traveling outside the United States. I'm going to be leaving to do kind of the same thing again in about a month. And that's all because of the way that I built my business, not only from the advice from my business mentors, but as well from kind of the life mentors as well.
Yeah. I love that take on it too. More about using it to create the life that you want versus letting it control you. Yeah. Do you have any like daily habits that you like to bake in, whether you're traveling or sedimentary for a little bit? That could be real estate related. I know you mentioned reading, or anything personal too, like meditation, anything like that kind of helps you keep that balance and stay grounded?
Yeah, I got a ton. So, typically the most important things for me throughout the day, non-business related, is as soon as I wake up, I try to practice gratitude. So 3 things as soon as I wake up that I'm grateful for. And it really shifts your view on the day and the supposed problems, using air quotes here, that you have. So, sometimes they're super simple. and pretty vague. Sometimes they're very, pointed. For example, today I said, I'm so glad that I have 4 limbs, right? I'm so glad that I have a roof above my head and food in a refrigerator. How many people can say that across the world? There's a lot of people that are struggling. So that puts everything else into perspective. You have a day where contractors are bugging you and, property managers aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. And in the end of the day, it's like, you know what? I'm going to address these issues, but I'm not going to let them stress me out because I'm living a pretty gifted life already. So gratitude's number one. Number 2 is physical fitness. So I work out 6 days a week. I find that by working out first thing in the morning, it usually gives me an additional 2 to 3 hours of productive mental capacity. I always tell people it's not about time management. It's more about energy management. So, if you're constantly feeling like you're being beaten down, you start making really bad decisions when it comes to business and life. So that's another one I really like. And then reaching out to my network. I know this cliche is a cliche for a reason, but cliches are cliches for a reason. And, your network is your net worth. The key, though, is not to constantly be hitting your network for what they can give you, but actually the opposite. What can you give them? Kind of facing the world in an abundance mentality focus. So I always like to reach out to, 2-3 people a day and say, hey, what can I do to help you build your business? That's question number 1. And then question number 2 is there anyone in my network that I can make a connection for you that will help you achieve the goals that you're looking to achieve, either in the short term or in the long term? And I found that those synergies of, being a connector, adding value, it comes back 10, 100-fold. You're helping everybody out. People know you as someone that helps individuals out, and that opens a lot of doors. It opens a lot of opportunities and relationships. So, I could keep going on, but I'll stick to those, those couple here to start.
No, I love that. It sounds like you're very grounded too. And I think being in a position where you can help others comes from a place of really being in a healthy place yourself, whether that's practicing gratitude and staying physically healthy, then that way you can help others. Yeah. Cool. Well, moving on, I know you mentioned you've been traveling quite a bit. You have some travel coming up. Can you share with the listeners, I guess, where that path has been recently for you and where you're headed?
Yeah. So like we mentioned before, I love to read. I probably have over 200 books on my Audible right now. Very early on, when I was still a teenager, I started to read Tim Ferriss's books. Very interesting, starting off with the 4-Hour Work Week, and then going through the 4-Hour Body, 4-Hour Chef, and then Tribe of Mentors and some of his other books. In one of those books, he alluded to a book called Vagabonding, the Forgotten Art of Long-Term Travel by Rolf Potts. And I read that book, and it was super interesting to me how the premise is that everyone waits until they're old and their body's decrepit to then go travel when they have no energy, as opposed to, scheduling travel in on a consistent basis throughout your life. And not just, when I say travel, I don't mean a vacation, 2-3 weeks. I'm talking about travel, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. And I said, you know what, I want to do this. I want to create a business that allows me this freedom, which in turn I found brings a lot of productivity back to the business. Because when you're constantly burnt out, you're in a very reactionary mode as opposed to proactive about how your business is running and what directions it's going. And what I found is because of, this amazing digital age that we live in, I can run my entire business as long as I have a reasonable internet connection, right? So when I read that book 5 years ago, I said, you know what, or I guess now 6 years ago, I said, I'm gonna make a commitment to myself that I'm gonna build my business around this. And then a couple of years passed by, and I read it again, and I just looked at myself in disgust, and I was like, I made a commitment to myself And here I am still, I think it was like February in Chicago. There was like 3 feet of snow outside. It was negative 20 degrees. They had something called like a bomb cyclone going over the city. So the wind chills were insane. And I said, let's get real about this. So that's when I decided to really put on overdrive my hiring and my processes and procedures that allowed me to build a business where I could work remote. And like I said before, there's a difference between travel and vacation. Vacation, you're not working at all. And you're trying to pack as much stuff as you can into 2 weeks. With travel, I worked my same schedule, but instead of working in Chicago, I'm working in Brazil or Portugal or Spain or France or Ireland or Scotland, Argentina, Mexico. It doesn't matter, right? So that was the real precipice of why I started doing this. And then, like I mentioned before, what I found is when you have the ability to kind of unplug, you become more efficient, especially out of necessity. If somebody wants to have a 3-hour lunch meeting that may not go anywhere, and I can email back saying, I would love to do that. Unfortunately, I'm 3,000 miles away. So how about let's send a quick email agenda of what you'd like to talk about on a phone call, and I'll see if we align, and I maybe even be able to answer all your questions, or even my assistant answer all your questions from that email, and then never have the need to meet, especially if it's something that we find, it's not mutually beneficial, or there's no way that we can help each other out. So it's been a super interesting journey.
I can imagine. I feel like I'm the same way. I haven't had the pleasure of working remote like you for that long, but I do know when I have a trip coming up or there's something I'm excited about and I also have a deadline with work, I'm much more incentivized to get that done sooner versus feeling like, okay, there's no sort of immediate press on that. I can kind of drag that out as much as I need to. So it sounds like it all goes back to just being happy and doing what aligns with your life. Were there any, it sounds like you've managed it really well, but were there any surprising challenges, especially working with a team that's probably mostly based in the US?
So some of the challenges that we do face, or we have faced when working with a staff that is truly around the globe, is differences in time zones. So when I was spending time in Brazil, I was 3 hours ahead of Central Time. Then when I was in Europe, I was 6 or 7 hours ahead of Central Time. And then we have, staff in the Philippines that it's almost a complete switch where our daytime is their nighttime, and et cetera. So one of the ways that we were able to get around that is by driving our company not as a time, in the seat type of company, but a scorecard based company, or scorecard driven based company. So I don't care when you work and what time it is. And if you do, 40 hours in the first 3 days, and then, you'd only do a couple the next day, or you only work 20 hours in a week, as long as you get those scorecard numbers that you need to get. So for example, if you're an acquisition person, you'll have a requirement for not only a daily, but a weekly amount of, how many outreaches have you done? How many connections did you get with sellers or buyers, depending on what you're doing? How many of those went to contract? How many of those contracts went through the due diligence process, and so on and so forth. So when you start running your company based on these scorecard metrics, or these KPIs, as a lot of people call them, key performance indicators, it makes it a lot easier to run a company, because now, as long as you have high performers on your team, they can't hide behind just clocking in, because it's a performance driven business. And very quickly you can see if there's issues, or if they need more work on their plate or less work on their plate. And then the nice thing is it makes everyone involved super relaxed, because they have the ability to make their own schedule, which then means I can attract, better talent. Say for example, we have a lot of, single moms that work with us, and that is a job in and of itself. So to have flexible work hours, to have the ability to, have a balanced life and work, especially in the younger, formative years of your children, it's huge, which then allows us to attract better talent. They're more relaxed when they're working, they produce better, they make better results. So that was one of the challenges that we had to overcome. And then, the ability, we're always looking at how do we become efficient and effective. And what we found is that making sure that you have written down processes for everything, and not just written once and then thrown into a shelf, but processes that are, perpetually being updated based on how the business changes, how the market changes. These allow you to run an extremely efficient organization, both from, a profitability standpoint, but then also from an overhead standpoint. We run a pretty lean business, and, triple net, bottom line profits. We're making the same types of profits of companies that are 4 to 5 times the manpower that we have. Mm-hmm. So, pros and cons to running this kind of international based company.
Yeah. I mean, similar, like pros and cons with everything, but it sounds like you've been able to really hand select each team member. And I think that says a lot about you as a leader too, that you can trust them to get their job done at a time that works for them.
Right.
Do you guys ever plan to like all meet up in the same place? Does that ever work out?
All of us at the same time is difficult in person. We do like virtual happy hours and
fun.
These quarterly events, things like that. And then because I travel a lot, I make the rounds and visit people. So next year I'll be in Southeast Asia. So I'll visit all of our employees in the Philippines, which will be a lot of fun. Thailand. I'll probably do Australia first and then kind of make my way up and then over. So yeah, it's, it's different because the traditional ways of building and nurturing a company culture, there's some challenges, but as long as you focus on that, you have the ability to build company culture, even if you're not seeing people, eye to eye.
Mm-hmm. I think what I picked up on that too, that I love, is that you being able to bring in people from all different areas and you being able to travel as you go really brings in so many different unique perspectives to the business.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I feel like you don't see that too often. Cool. Well, moving into our second topic for the day, kind of want to cover your unique perspective and insights as a self-storage titan in today's CRE market. So to provide a little bit more context for our listeners, what is Triple SE?
Yeah, so we're a self-storage sponsor. So we raise capital from high net worth investors, and along with our, side by side by our capital. And then we go out and we execute a strategy that is basically everything self-storage. So, we have, I always say 3.5 buckets that we have. So, the first bucket is we go out and we buy what, is colloquially referred to as mom and pop facilities. These are typically owners that own 2 or fewer facilities. They don't have industrial scale. They don't have economies of scale. And there is a huge opportunity in that market to not only professionalize, but then also aggregate. Mm-hmm. Right now is a fantastic time in the self-storage market because of the fragmentation of the market. About 70% of the total self-storage stock or facilities available in the United States are owned by these type of owners, 2 or fewer facilities. The top 6 publicly traded REITs, they own about 18%. And then the remaining 100 largest operators below that own another 10 to 12%. So there is this huge opportunity right now, as we've seen with, insane amounts of private equity, hedge fund money flowing into our space to aggregate and consolidate. So our first bucket is we go, find these mom and pop sellers. Usually everything we do is direct to seller. We buy, I think to date, 96% of our inventory has come from direct to seller outreach. We buy those facilities, we turn them around. We increase revenue, we drop expenses, potentially even expand the facility itself. And then we aggregate them into portfolios of 10 to 20 facilities each, and then sell them off to the next highest fish on the feeding chain, if you will. Mm-hmm. So That's a really good strategy because not only are you increasing the value based off of the increased NOI for that, grade of assets, cap rate, but in addition to that, you also get a cap rate premium by aggregating because now you have larger entities that have a cheaper cost of capital that are much rather willing to underwrite $100 million purchase as they are to write a $1 million purchase. And it takes roughly about, the same amount of manpower overhead to do that. So you're opening up a buyer class that can pay more. On the opposite side of, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, that's very interesting. It sounds like generally speaking too, you found that like mom and pop owners are kind of just below market rents. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's not uncommon for us to walk into these facilities and without even doing $1 in CapEx, we have the ability to raise the rents anywhere between 20 and 60%. Some facilities over 100%. And that's because, there's this perspective where if the owner is working at the facility, they become friends with the tenants, and whatever their rate was 10 years ago when they moved in, it's still the same rate. This year, they may not do a lot of market analysis and, secret shop their competitors in the local area to see what the competitors are charging. So a lot of the times we find value just in the fact that, our facilities that we're about to buy is charging $6 a foot in rent when all the competitors are at 10. And in one day from purchasing it and sending out rent increase letters, we're able to increase the value of that facility substantially. So we really like that strategy. Mm-hmm. The only issue with it is that these facilities are typically much smaller. They're only 20 to 30,000 net rentable square feet. That makes it very difficult to achieve our 10-year goal, which is to become a top 20 operator in the country with, roughly 8 to 10 million net rentable square feet. So what we decided to do to augment this side of our business is to build Class A REIT grade ground up construction, buying land, typically 4 to 10 acres, 4 to 20 acres, and putting up a Class A facility that may be 80, 100, or 120,000 net rentable square feet. So basically doing the equivalent of 5 or 6 of those mom and pop facilities all at once. And, obviously the prices are different. Our mom and pop stuff's usually $1 to $2 million, $1 to $3 million. Maybe if there's an expansion component, there's another $1 million or $2 million on top of that. Our ground up development deals, they start at roughly 16 million and go up from there. So the ability to reach that kind of critical mass, which will allow us in 10 years to, instead of selling off individual facilities, allow us to sell off an entire brand or entire company, like we've seen recently in the industry with, Extra Space buying Life Storage or Public buying Simply. These type of deals that are huge deals where the premium on the assets in the underlying portfolio is massive because they're also getting that business goodwill from buying the brand as well. Mm-hmm. So we have that, that's bucket 2, those ground up developments. But then when COVID hit, we started especially in the beginning of COVID, we were seeing massive supply chain disruption. Sometimes we had lead items that were 18 months or just question mark. They didn't know when they would be able to get the materials we needed when we were doing these ground up constructions. So we pivoted into our third bucket, which is our adaptive reuse conversions. These are deals where we're finding big box retail stores that have gone dormant and converting them into Class A storage. So it may be a Sears building or a Target or a Kmart, a Walmart. As long as it has the envelope is already up, that would allow us to not only reduce the amount of materials we had to order, so, mitigating risk from supply chain, but then also drop our total cost of the project because we're already walled in. So we're dropping anywhere between, going from, call it 120, 130 bucks a foot down to 80 bucks a foot all in. And then it also allowed us to drop our time to certificate of occupancy, which is more important now, now more than ever because of where interest rates are. Every month that I have an asset that is not producing cash flow, I'm burning cash, right? Some of my deals we're spending $90,000 to $100,000 a month in interest payments. So if I can reduce the time from shovels in the ground to certificate of occupancy by even 3 or 4 months, that's $500,000 in savings for my investors, right?
Very interesting. I know you talk a little bit about that shift during COVID, especially with the cost of materials skyrocketed and how that affected ground up development, and how you guys specifically pivoted from that to retail that you're converting into self-storage. As a whole, in the self-storage market in the last 5 to 10 years, what have you really seen as far as trends going and how the sector has evolved?
Yeah. So, we're coming off of a decade of easy money policies where debt was basically free, substantially below inflation rates. So you have a negative real rate, which means borrowers win, right? Because you're borrowing money and paying it back with cheaper dollars. So prior to the end of this easy money policy, we saw a lot of overvaluations in product, and that drove a supply shortage. So because of that, a lot of these buyers that were traditionally stabilized asset buyers started going further and further back in the lease-up process and paying what they would have paid for a stabilized asset just to have an asset. We're seeing the same thing in the residential market right now. So, call it 24 months ago, 18 to 24 months ago, there was just a lot of easy money chasing projects that, weren't the best projects. If those investors were lucky and they put their projects on fixed rates, they'd still, have time to weather through this current storm that we're going through. But if they didn't, we're seeing a lot of issues, not only in the storage market, but just in the real estate market as a whole, across all commercial real estate. You see the amount of debt that is coming due in the next 18 to 24 months. And those investors are not going to be able to refinance those projects without coming to the table with a substantial amount of capital. It's going to cause an opportunity for those that are sitting on large cash stockpiles to buy deals below the cost to build them. That's typically one of our strategies, especially on the mom and pop side. Actually, something I learned from Sam Zell's book. When valuations are crazy, you're always safe by buying assets below replacement cost or the cost to build. Nowadays, so because of that, it was difficult to find deals based on open markets if you went through a broker. If you were buying off market, it was still easy to find deals. It was easy to finance deals because everything cash flowed. Nowadays, regardless if you're going off market or on market, the ability to buy existing assets is extremely difficult because of the debt service requirements needed by the banks, especially your local and regional banks that are having, liquidity crunches, and they're worried about depositor accounts. I had a couple loan offers come back recently where the banks, to even look at my loan package, they wanted me to guarantee that I was going to bring 20 to 30% of the loan amount in a CD, in a certificate of deposit. That's just like how crazy it's getting. So that caused two things to happen. One, speculative assets like land have dropped substantially in value. Prior to, call it 24 months ago, I had guys that would do what I call the paper development. They would buy a piece of land, they would entitle it, they'd get it shovel ready, and then they would sell these projects off for, $1 million to $2 million an acre, which was insane. And now those same projects are coming back and we're picking them up at $250,000 an acre, $300,000, $400,000 an acre. Some of these are shovel ready sites where we literally, all we have to do is apply for the permit and we're ready to go. So that caused our pipeline to shift from more of a 70% acquisition, 30% development, now to kind of the opposite. We're at about 70% development, 30% acquisition. The second piece that it caused issues with was sellers. For the last 2 years, we've had brokers from all the large firms whispering in the ear about how much their assets were worth. And now the money's gone, so those assets aren't worth that much. But because of psychology and the anchoring effect, when you tell someone their assets worth $10 million, that's all that you remember. Not it's worth $10 million because interest rates are 4% and you can get 70% leverage on a 10-year term. All they hear is that it's worth $10 million. But now, people are coming in and say the banks literally will not allow me to buy this at this price. So you have two options. You can either drop your price down to where mine is, and we're still in that transition period of sellers starting to understand where the new valuation is on their facility, but we still have a ton that don't and refuse to accept that. So the way that we get around that to continue filling up our acquisition pipeline for existing facilities is to offer seller financing terms. I'm saying, hey, I am more than happy to give you the price that you think your facility is worth, but you have to give me the terms that were available to me from the banks when some Marcus and Millichap or, big house offered that valuation for you. So, we're picking up a lot of deals where the sellers are, financing anywhere between 50 to 90% of the purchase. They're carrying it at either zero interest all the way up to the max we have on the books right now is 5% interest loan, 10-year term up to 12-year term, amortizations up to 30 years. Because then it makes the deals work as long as you have both sides. A lot of people think that the only thing that's important about a deal is the price, and that's not true. It's the financing package. Because, if you look at what is your total interest paid over the term of the loan, then you have all these different levers you can pull and say, okay, well, if we drop the payment, can I pay more? Or if we increase the down payment or decrease the down payment, do I pay less? Do I pay more? So there's all these levers that you can pull. And that's been kind of the biggest difference right now. The market's just slowing down, grinding to a halt. A lot of my, we work a lot with Marcus and Millichap, and we listen in on their quarterly meetings about their kind of state of the market, and even talking to some of my top brokers, seeing what they're foreseeing over the next 6 to 10 months. And you have guys saying, we're expected to bring in half of the commissions that we brought in last year, or even less than that. And that's brutal.
Tough. Yeah, it's interesting you say that too. We've seen a bit of that on our end. I would say in the last 4 to 5 months, a lot of people have been coming to Crexi to try to find properties where there is seller financing, or trying to look at properties based on when there's a loan coming due and what the interest rate is, and in hopes try to get in contact with the owner.
Yeah, and it's interesting. There's a lot of corollaries back to the 80s during the Paul Volcker years. Now, before, no one cared about your paper because they were just going to go get their own financing. Now you can, especially if you have assumable loans, that paper in and of itself has value in above what comes with the facility. So if you can negotiate, to take over an assumable loan at 3 or 4%, that gets you so much more value. So I think there's an opportunity on the seller side as well, that if you're a smart transaction engineer and you learn how to pull these levers in your favor, you can make a win-win operation where not only are you getting a higher price for your property, you're also getting interest payments on top of that. The seller is getting a better or the buyer is getting a better price. It all works out. You're basically cutting out the middleman, which is these banks, which have had record profits for the last decade, right? Like, if you're a seller, don't you want some of those profits as well? So
absolutely. I guess with that too, what investment principles guide you and your company? And kind of a two-part to that too, what do you guys look for in investments or in business collaborators?
Yeah, so the principles, we kind of guide our company based off of core values. So at the highest level, we have fun, integrity, drive, and others first. We find that these 4 things, if anybody that's working with us, they have to align with these. So it could be vendors, it can be partners, It can be our lenders, what have you. But then in the end of the day, what self-storage syndicated equities is striving to offer is tax advantaged self-storage investments with an emphasis on downside mitigation, while also offering social stewardship to our local communities. So that's going to be, number one with how we operate. Everything from there becomes kind of more concrete. When it comes to what are we looking for when it comes to asset acquisition and allocation, we like, personal thesis here is that I think we're in for a pretty tough go of it over the next couple of years. I mean, if you look at the level of not only household but business debt on the books, the number of bankruptcies filed has increased higher than the last two financial crises already. So, I want to go into areas that are going to have a better ability to withstand that, because in the end of the day, the U.S. is a consumer-driven economy, and we are a product. Self-storage is a product. So you need to have money to be able to pay for additional space to store your things. So, we're going into areas that have high population growth. The Southeast has been absolutely fantastic. The Carolinas, Georgia, Florida is huge for us right now. We have about $160 million in development in that Tampa, Orlando corridor alone on the I-4. We're looking for areas that have diverse employers. So, you don't have a, Southeast Ohio / Detroit type situation when every time a recession hits, the one employer in town leaves and now no one has money to pay for services and consumer goods. Because self-storage is such a hyper localized business, we're really pulling the majority of our customer base from call it a 1 to 5 mile radius around the facility, or even more accurately, a 5 to 15 minute drive time from our facility. We have this draw to really reinvest into our local communities, whether it be homeless shelters, working with animals, police departments doing school, supply drives or food drives. We've sponsored little league teams and little hockey teams. What you find is that, you're supporting the people that support you. So it keeps the money in the community, which benefits everybody. But then it's also, brand recognition. In the end of the day, as much as I want to tell you my company's better than anybody else's, they're just metal boxes on concrete slabs, right? There's literally nothing different about them. So if you have the choice of renting from two metal boxes that are the same rate, but one of them donates a portion of their proceeds to local communities like, Ben and Jerry's or Tom's or any of these type of organizations, you're going to have that feel-good factor of choosing to work, even though everything's the same price, same, quality, choosing to work with somebody that's going to make an impact in the local community that you're a part of.
Yep. Interesting point. Thanks for your honesty there. Yeah. I think that's a perfect segue into our third topic too, because you've alluded to some changes that you think are coming up. So I guess looking ahead into 2024, would love to dive into a more macro perspective and hear your thoughts on self-storage's both short and long-term outlook.
Yeah. So, when we talk about macroeconomics and outlook, I think it's important to even step back further than self-storage and even real estate. Just look at, global macro trends and, geopolitical action. So COVID, we saw this massive breakdown in this concept of just-in-time supply chain. And that's causing a lot of increased cost and a lot of uncertainty, which investors hate, right? So, I see this trend continue for the next at least 10 years of this deglobalization, where we're going to have to go through a lot of tough times while we friendshore, onshore critical industries that are important to the development of our nation, or, whichever nation you're a part of. I think the United States is situated pretty well. It's just, everyone's going to have to go through this decoupling that's going to be pretty tough to get through. So like I said before, there were some materials that prior to this whole breakdown, we'd be able to get them in 3 months. And now our vendor is saying 18 months or ? We don't really know yet, because it has to come from China and they're getting it from Taiwan, and Taiwan's getting it from who know where. I mean, it's crazy how interconnected this economy is. We've touched on the subject of the easy money decade that we just came from. And the unfortunate part is everyone thinks that was normal and that now we have high rates. The interesting thing is that historically, we're still below the average over the last 100 years in financing in the United States. So my super muddy crystal ball, I foresee additional inflation raging throughout not only our economy, but the global economy, and then continued breakdown in supply chains. You can't print 5 to 8 times your money supply and just assume nothing's going to happen from doing that. When you have 8 times more dollars chasing the same amount of goods, eventually everything goes up. Mm-hmm. What's great about real estate is that it is a hedge against inflation, because as real estate is a good, it also increases, linearly with inflation to keep up with the demand. Storage is doing really well. It's unfortunate that COVID affected many people in a negative way. I truly do feel for those people, but in the storage industry, we did record numbers between 2020 and 2022. I mean, in 2021 alone, my portfolio the revenue increased over 80%. And that's just us raising our rents in response to our competitors, usually the REITs who run the markets, raising their rents. So we were always trying to stay, call it $5 below what the REITs were charging, and just piggybacking off of their marketing. We have 2 large generational divides that are helping our industry quite a bit. So first, you have the baby boomers, the largest generation in U.S. history. They're retiring in mass right now, something like 15 to 16,000 people a day. And in addition to that retirement, they're also typically relocating and also downsizing. So because those people were raised by a generation that went through the Great Depression, they were taught to hold on to everything, because you don't know when you're going to need this broken folding chair from 1986, but you're going to leave it in your storage facility anyway. And now you're moving from a 5-bedroom ranch in the suburbs to an active living community or assisted living community that you're 1 bedroom or a 2-bedroom at most townhome on a single level. You don't have the space to fit all the things you've accumulated over the last 60 to 80 years. And you end up using storage for those things. And then, on the older end of the baby boomers, you have a lot of them, passing away right now. And the children don't want to emotionally deal with that storage facility. So what do? They just change their credit card on it instead of their parents, and then just continue paying it for another 5 to 10 years until they're finally ready to deal with it.
Yeah. It's interesting. It sounds like a lot of people, when they think self-storage, it's convenience.
Exactly. Not only convenience, but then also just the sticky aspect of it, where if you're renting an apartment for $2,500 and the rent goes up 15%, that's a couple $100 a month, and that's a huge increase in cost. So you're going to move out. But if you have a $1,500 or a $150 unit for that additional space, and it goes up, 15%, that's like $18, right? So an extra $18 a month, you're not going to go rent a U-Haul truck, spend 2-3 days moving to a different facility, time wasted, opportunity costs, especially in your golden years where time is super precious. It's just not worth it to you, right? So you have a super high sticky factor. People don't move when rents increase. On the other side of that generational divide, you have the millennials, right? Where we unfortunately were in the middle of 2 financial crises right in our peak earning years, right? Coming out of high school and college, and then now in household formation age. And that's causing a lot of people to opt for, living in what they call walkable communities, typically living in more urban settings, places where you can walk to the grocery store, the nightlife, the entertainment, the food, the restaurants, whatever you need. So what you're going to do is, instead of getting a 4,000 square foot home in the burbs. You get a 700 to 1,200 square foot condo in the city. And then you use storage as an additional closet or a second or third closet, because the cost per foot for that storage versus the cost per foot living in an urban environment, the disparity is massive. So, maybe you leave all your winter clothes in there, or your summer clothes, or your bikes or kayaks or toys, whatever you have. So, and the millennials are the second largest, generation. So anytime you follow the large generations, they have spending power, and they're looking for services and activities that, help them live the lifestyle that they're looking for.
Yep. Makes sense. It's such an interesting point too, because we're based in Los Angeles. We live on the west side. So I know so many people too that have a small apartment and get a storage unit just to house that extra stuff, because it ends up being more economical.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. So I guess next question, what are the challenges of being an investor in self-storage right now? And how is SSSE looking to navigate those challenges?
Yeah, so I think there's two sets of problems depending on if you want to be an active investor or if you want to be a passive investor. So, on the active side, the debt markets are in shambles right now, at least the traditional debt markets, the banks, credit unions, local and regionals. The leverage they're offering is extremely low. The interest rates that they're offering are super high. The guarantees they want are, obscene. And then they want you to trap a bunch of capital at their institutions because they made bad bets over the last 5 years, buying bonds at super low interest rates. And now if they had a liquidity event or a run on their bank, if they had to sell those bonds, they'd lose massive amounts of money. So what that has done is it's driven everybody up one level in the debt market. So now you're dealing with a lot of pref equity lenders, debt funds, people that are a little bit more opportunistic, and they're charging rates that correspond to the perceived risk that they're taking. So that's obviously going to slow down everything. Mm-hmm. So navigating those debt markets is something that you need to be really good at. But then also, like we talked about before, the supply chain side, if you're a major component of your business is construction, you're going to have to really start managing that piece. We're to the point now where we're ordering parts for projects that we haven't even closed on yet because of the amount of lead time that we need. And the contingencies that we're having to put into our construction estimates are, historically massive, because, during COVID, for example, on some of our projects, the cost of steel went up 500% in like an 8-month period. Jeez. So you can never, the thing about black swans is you can never know what they are. You can just know that they're going to come around every 10 years. Yep. So just making sure that you're underwriting as a sponsor extremely conservatively, and that you have multiple suppliers, not just the best price supplier, but multiple suppliers for each trade that you need and each material that you need. And then, obviously the difficulty of finding deals in this economy because of the leverage that is being offered to us. So those are all kind of pieces that we have to navigate, and just making sure that we have a reserve account, or kind of what I call a war chest, just in case, we get another virus that only targets self-storage owners or storage users. You never know, right? It's crazy. Know. Right. So those are some of the issues that we're facing on the, the operator side. Mm-hmm. But then on the limited partner side, you have all of those issues. But then on top of that, you have to be able to vet good sponsors. During the age of easy money, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending who you are, you could make a ton of mistakes and still make money because asset values were going up, capital was cheap, so the winds were, underneath your wings, they're at your back. Nowadays, that's not happening. So as Warren Buffett says, when the tide goes out, you see who's swimming without, swim trunks. who doesn't have pants on. And that's starting to happen right now. You have a lot of sponsors that they got into the business because they saw easy money. They did not operate their business in a way that would be sufficient over multiple market cycles, especially a down market cycle. And you have, unfortunately, you're hearing a lot of investors losing a bunch of cash because their sponsors were ill-equipped for forecasting bad days, rainy days. So I think, as a limited partner, you have a lot of those issues, but you're still looking to chase yield. How do you get those returns? How do you get those returns on a risk-adjusted basis? And that's why I think self-storage is primed to do really well. It's a recession-resilient asset. It's done very well in down cycles, and it has asymmetric risk-return profiles.
Interesting. And on the flip side, too, of those challenges that you mentioned, where do you think that there's untapped potential right now?
Yeah, so, everything's a double-edged sword. So it's really unfortunate for those sponsors and investors that got caught with their pants off when the tie went off. But that offers opportunities for companies like ours that is well capitalized and has been waiting for events like this. We could swoop in with cash, purchase quickly, and buy assets at below replacement values. So I think there's a ton of opportunity there. Just pulling a list of expiring variable rate loans or fixed periods on longer term loans that are expiring into a variable rate environment. A lot of these deals aren't going to pencil, and people are going to have to take losses, but they're going to be forced to sell, because if they don't sell, then the bank is going to sell and they get no equity as opposed to the equity they thought they were going to get. Mm-hmm. So it allows for, organizations like ours to, I don't want to say the words take advantage of the situation, but we weren't going out there and spending 98% of our available capital when the times were good, because we knew times like this were going to come. So we purposely stymied our growth slightly during the good times because we knew the opportunity to grow was really going to come when there was blood in the water.
Interesting.
Let's skip to the rapid fire questions after this.
Okay.
I don't want to take up too much more time since we're almost at the 1 o'clock.
Okay. Given your specialized background and expertise, we'd love to ask you a few rapid fire words of advice questions.
Let's do it.
Okay. So first one, if you were given $50 million today and had to invest it immediately, what would your go-to asset type and location be, and why?
Obviously I'm biased to self-storage in the Southeast. So I would buy self-storage in the Southeast in cash and wait for rates to stabilize and for liquidity issues to be resolved. But in addition to that, I'm also an LP investor in other sponsors. I really like the opportunity right now in the physical and rare earth metals mining part of the world, with this 2050 goal of all these countries to electrify the world with electrical vehicles and solar panels, et cetera. I think there's a massive opportunity for junior miners that are already producing, but are sitting on large pieces of land that have assets in the ground. I also think that there is an opportunity in the affordable home space. We're seeing this affordability crisis, not only in the United States, but across the world. So investing in companies and assets that can solve that problem, like 3D printed homes, mobile homes, those are also really great opportunities. I just don't want to operate anything that has residential tenants or has somebody living in my asset. But if there's a professional that I can invest in that has a proven system, then I'll do those things. So that's what I'd say. It's self-storage, anything having to do with affordability crisis, and then anything having to do with the electrification of the world. Those can be really great assets to invest in, especially if you invest all cash.
Yep. Awesome. And what is your favorite tool or software that you use on the job? And no, it's not a trick question.
Difficult. So personal life is Audible. That's a blatant one. Business life, I really like process management and task management tools. So, Asana, Monday, those types of tasks are really good for running your business and running them with kind of an operating system in place. Other than that, any type of tool that allows you to get data quickly. So Yardi, Crexi, Radius, Esri, these are all fantastic tools to use if you're in our space.
Sure. What would you say is the most common misconception about your job or your industry?
There's a lot. So self-storage for the longest time used to be kind of the, I know it's a weird thing, but the ugly, redheaded stepchild. So nobody liked it. Everybody thought it was a gross asset. People were trading it at 14 to 15% cap rates. And then all of a sudden, when people realized that these things are cash cows and that, you have Money Magazine running about them and Fortune writing about them, then all of a sudden the money kind of flowed in. So the problem is there's still a lot of people that believe these are kind of the old school gravel on a farmland facilities that are made out of cinder block. That's not what they look like anymore. These things are multi-story Class A facilities that look like beautiful office buildings. And the people that I really wish understood this are the ones that run municipal zoning meetings.
That's too funny. Well, as we wrap up, do you have any parting words that you would like to share with the audience?
Yeah, if you guys want to learn more about self-storage, we post a ton of free education across all of our social media channels, including my personal social media channel. So you can find us on, our website, which is sse.com or Sierra Echo.com. You can follow us on all social medias at that same handle or Self-Storage Syndicated Equities. You can follow me at the Storage Stud across all social media handles. And then if you have some further questions that aren't answered on our website or on our social media channels, feel free to reach out to me personally. I always give out my cell phone number for high quality podcasts like this. My number is area code 630-408-8090.
Well, Fernando, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sitting down with us, sharing your insights. I know you're very busy, so we really appreciate you being here with us.
Thanks for having me on, Taylor.
Yeah, and thank you to everybody, too, who tuned in today. If you enjoyed this podcast, don't miss the next one. Visit go.crexi.com/podcast and sign up to get the next episode delivered straight to your inbox. And, of course, you can also subscribe to the Crexi Podcast on your favorite podcast app and check our YouTube channel for video recordings of each episode. Take care and be sure to tune in next time.